I'm going to record this for the people who are missing. At any rate, so here we go. It was really important that we go back and that we teach you a little bit about ancient history and so on. And the student here that needs to go really fast immediately is Christopher. Go see Mr. Runyon immediately, okay? So let's get that done. What, Christopher? No, Christopher. Oh, no, we do. Yeah, right here. Yeah. Okay, now, so let's get back on track because I want to record this and I don't want to have to record it again. So bear with me just a little bit here as we start looking at a little bit of the lecture that we gave yesterday. And that was, we had to define civilization and we had to define the ancient world in order for Monday's discussion to make any sense. In fact, the truth is, if I'd known that gap existed, I would have lectured on the ancient governments and things first before we jumped into Greece. So we're going to come back to that. And this discussion, you'll have all the whole holiday weekend to prepare a defense of anarchy, right? So we're going to give you a little bit more time. Instead, I ran into another roadblock, and that was we found that when it came to preparing for the state test, I've got lots of questions on this one guide coming up on the state test, and a really great essay, by the way, for this one. So it's going to be a good one. I think you're going to like it. But the state test requires that we know certain things. For example, let's keep it simple, right? You did your 33 question study stack thing, right? Everybody's done that twice at least, you know. By the way, put your computers and everything away, put your phones away, because, you know, this is going to help you just answer those questions really fast. It'll make your study activity guide go so much quicker. Name the 3 branches of government. Let's just do it really fast. Yeah, legislative, executive, judicial. They're right here on the screen. U.S. government. This is very much an elementary school diagram, but it still works. Now, the Constitution, of course, starts out, as all legal documents do, with a preamble. So in other words, if the House of Representatives drafts a new law, and they will stipulate in the beginning a preamble what the statute is about. Now I'm using the term statute deliberately here because it's a word you need to know. A statute is a law that is passed by a legislative authority, enacted by a legislative authority. Okay, so our Constitution is no different. Name the legislative authority that came together to write this document? Yeah.
Legislative authority. The legislative branch of government or Congress.
Yeah, who authorized the people to write the Constitution in the first place? Yeah, go ahead. No. Everybody thinks that. It was basically Alexander Hamilton getting the states to send delegates. And oh, by the way, of the 13 states at the time, only 12 did. Which state decided to take this off and not play? Rhode Island. They were already on an independent course. This is for Sumner. Okay, so same thing. Got to run real fast. Okay, so here we have this preamble, which is the introduction to a statute. And it was the state legislatures that voted in, right? Remember, they're thinking of themselves as independent countries here. And they sent delegates to fix a constitution that was broken. What was the name of that constitution? The constitution that empowered the Continental Congress. Yeah.
Wasn't it
the what? Go ahead. The Articles of Confederation. It was written during the Revolutionary War, and it just didn't work. It broke apart.
I said it, and then I
and then so remember, I'm recording. Okay, remember, I'm recording. So this idea of the articles being broken, the states knew it was broken, and here was the biggest rub: was the economy was failing. Right? And so how do we pull this back together? So they were authorized by their states to go and fix this thing, right? And so they started out this marvelous document, the Constitution, with basically a preamble to a statute that has legislative authority. A statute is a formal written law enacted by legislative authority. Now listen very carefully. Name me 3 legislative authorities that have power over your lives. that can make laws that affect you directly? Yes. State legislature. Look, let's talk about this. Wow, you know, half the people in here are wearing masks, half the people aren't. Who decided that the local school board should not make that decision, that you and your families get to make that decision? Who decided that? State legislature did, right? Okay, so fair enough, right? So that's why we're in the situation we're in. Did that ruling apply to the universities? I'm not sure on the mask mandate, but I know one thing. The universities are now requiring what? Vaccinations. Now, hopefully they're smart about it and they have religious exemptions, and some people who maybe want to test instead, and that makes sense, at least to me anyway. But it's the state legislature making that decision, okay? Now, what about speeding through Mapleton? And by the way, don't do that because they always pull you over. Who lives in that area? You know what I'm talking about? Mapleton. They're going to get you. Who made the rule that it's 30 miles an hour across the main road? Yes. The city what? Who makes the rules in the city of Mapleton? The city council. They have legislative authority, city council. So when you speed through that, they have a special court right there in the city that you go to pay your fine. Right? Do you go to a state court for that? No. Do you go to a national court for that? No. And the other one that makes rules that govern your life is which one? Who other makes rules? So I love the fact that you guys did this right. You talked about the state having important authority, you have the local, and then who's got the top job, if you will. Yeah, what's the name of the group that makes the laws that we live by on a national level? Yes. Congress. Very important. That's the correct answer. First period, somebody said the House of Representatives. And what's wrong with that answer? Yeah.
There's the Senate too.
That's right. We have a two-chamber legislature, and the law has got to be passed by both, and it has to be the exact same law. So they have to go back and forth and figure it out. But when they pass it, that becomes the law of the land. And we're going to explain why here in a second. So anything the Congress does, right, is going to have a preamble to the statute or statutory law. Now, by the way, it's this chart over here. If you look over this chart right here, you have the House and you have the Senate. And we talked a little bit about their subpoena power. Make sure you understand the word subpoena. That's important. How many members of the US Congress represent you personally? As an individual? Yes, take it. How many?
In the state or
Yeah, how many people, you living in Utah, how many people in the US Congress in DC are actually representing you personally as somebody who lives in Utah? Okay, is the answer 2? What's the answer? 1? Why is it 3?
2 members of the Senate and 1 representative in the House of Representatives.
Okay, and when I say represent, okay, so you had the Senate, right? Okay, very good. But then you also have 1 member of the House. And this is where it gets a little tricky. We have 1 member of the House and 2 senators that represent us. All right, now, John Curtis, you need to know that name, is the member of the House that represents which half of the valley? The east half or the west half? Yes, the eastern half. Western half, and somebody please bring me a card for this guy when you see a campaign poster out, but who's the name of the guy that represents the western half of us? Yeah. Burgess Owens. Do you need to know their names for the state test? Absolutely. I've already asked you the governor's name and so on. You'll need to know those names too. So depending on where you live, you have 1 member of the House and 2 members of the Senate. Now they really do represent you. Let me give you kind of not such an absurd case. Say you get arrested because you're on vacation in North Korea and suddenly find yourself in jail for espionage. Who does your family go to? Well, they can go to the State Department, but they can also go to one of these 2 very powerful senators or to this member of Congress and ask for help. And they have liaison people that will actually work with the State Department, work with the Justice Department to try to get you free. By the way, it happens a lot, not North Korea, but lots of places around the world. And lots of other things happen too. Who do you go to if you don't like the laws being passed? Or if you want a law passed? You can write to all three of them, right? You can also, if you want, write to Nancy Pelosi, who's the head of the House, and you can write to these others if you want. But that is the ones that will actually listen to you the most, because they represent you, literally do. So I can't tell you, countless people I know have had to reach out for different reasons to these different senators. Some respond better than others, by the way. Some quick response, they'll stay on it, they'll do the very best they can. Others, they just, I'm sorry, but we don't have time for your question, which is very interesting, by the way. But I can tell you Mitt Romney will pay attention, and I can also tell you Mike Lee will pay attention, and I haven't had any interaction with Curtis yet, but I assume that he would. But I had an interaction with another, and I'm going, wow, this guy just does not care, does he? And so at any rate, they represent you. Now, let's ask the question. In the Congress of the United States, right, that building over there that got overrun on January 6th, all that building, it has two parts to it, okay? So the whole thing together is called Congress. On the Senate side, how many senators are there total? Shout it out. How many? 50 is how many states, and how many per state? Two. So how many? So there's 100. Okay, everybody got that? There's 100. Now, which side's bigger, the House side or the Senate? Which one has more members? The House. Why? Because they represent, listen carefully, here's the answer. They represent a certain segment of population. So roughly 800,000 people get one member of the House. Huh? So roughly 800,000 people living on this side of the valley and some other little places in and around Utah, they get Curtis. On this side, it's this side of the valley plus half of Salt Lake. They get Burgess Owens. And so that's how it's decided. So these are called districts. You need to know the term. And districts are, every state has districts. Utah has 4 of them. So take Utah and just divide it into 4 squares basically, and you have one for each of those. Down in St. George, mine is Stewart, actually. I'm represented by Stewart because that's actually where I call home. All right, so that's how that works. So let's go through the numbers again. Members of the House, how many? How many total? 435. How many represent you? 1. Members of the Senate, how many are there? 100. How many represent you personally? 2. Everybody got that? Okay, so there's a bunch of questions there. Oh, okay, and I'm going to try to throw you some curves there, so you're going to have to read the questions carefully. All right, so when Congress passes a law, or even your city council passes a resolution for the city, they're going to give an introductory statement as to what it's about. And when it gets enacted, well, then it gives the statute legal authority. So a statute is a law that has legal authority, that's been passed, that's been approved. All right, now let's go through the preamble of the United States. Now, the preamble of the United States, the introductory paragraph, I think, by the way, beautifully written. Just got to say, personal opinion here, but I just think they did a great job with this part of it. We the people, oh, wait a minute, stop right there. Hang on. Who had sent them to fix this Constitution, to fix the old articles? Who had sent them? Who empowered them? Who gave them the authority to even have a meeting? Yes. Who said we're going to have a meeting? And by the way, we're going to give you delegates and they have the authority to make decisions on our behalf. Who gave them the authority to even have this meeting? The state legislatures of the states. So why on earth didn't they start out, we the states of the United States? See, at this particular moment, listen very carefully. They decided to not worry about states. They were going to, in software terms, decrement or lower the power of states. Instead of states being individual countries that had sovereignty, key word here, sovereignty or power over their own decisions, they're going to take some of that sovereignty away. And instead of taking the power from the states, they're going to take the power from the people. That there is a revolutionary thought. We the people, well, there were only 55 of them and they were all men. So is that really we the people? But they took their authority from the people, not the states. That's really important to know. And oh, by the way, also, when you look at that, this is what astounds me to this day. Because an earlier document called the Declaration of Independence, a guy as smart as Thomas Jefferson said, right? All men are created equal. And when he said men, he meant men. All men are created equal. If you look at the philosophy and all that went into that document, he wasn't including women in that. All men are created equal. Excuse me, time out. Time out. I'm astounded to this day that they didn't say, we the men of the United States. I think that is important, because had they not used that word, had they done what Jefferson did, all men are created equal, instead of we the men of the United States of America, can you imagine the discussions we'd be having today? But they instead chose a much smarter term for history. People. We're going to represent the people that live in this geographic area we now call the United States in order to form, and I love these lines, these are brilliant lines, these are great. In order to form a more perfect union, from the Articles of Confederation, which weren't working, we're going to try to make an improvement here. But what does it also imply? That the Constitution is not perfect. Now, again, I'm recording, right? Or I take your questions. But here's the deal. They knew this document wasn't perfect. It wasn't going to be perfect. It was a rush job, people. You had 55 people who totally disagreed with each other, some who came and went at will, who weren't even there for the whole time, and then some who were totally against it when it was written. And the arguments were insanely heated. That's why they kept all of the meeting notes in secret. Madison, who kept detailed notes of everything that went on, they kept his journal secret for 50 years. Because they all said things that they might have wanted to regret and take back later. Who knows? But the truth of the matter is they knew it wasn't perfect from the start. And that's why they put in a provision to change it, called the amendment process. Now, in order to form a more perfect union, they're not saying, we're going to form the most perfect union. They didn't say that. They said, we're going to try to make it a little better. And every generation then has the responsibility to try to make it a little better. Establish justice makes sense, right? So we're going to talk about legal systems and all that. Ensure domestic tranquility. What they were trying to stop was the revolution itself, continuing on. The people, once they have a revolution, guess what? They feel like, oh, I can revolt again. Right? I don't like a law, I can take up arms and I can, no. Once this Constitution goes into effect, no more shooting at each other. We just got through the American Revolution, which was a civil war after all, and we're going to end the violence. And one of the goals of the Constitution of the United States, especially after Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, was to ensure domestic tranquility. What would the people who wrote that line think about January 6th insurrection, where our capital was literally overrun and the police force protecting that building were actually beaten and where 4 people died? Would they have put up with that for a second? I can tell you for a fact, George Washington wouldn't have put up with that. Evidence, the Whiskey Rebellion. No violence, please. Let's find another way to solve our problems. Ensure domestic tranquility. Provide for the common defense. Yes, we need to defend ourselves. Promote the general welfare. So does that mean vaccination mandates? Good question, right? So governments, this government is to ensure general welfare. Let's debate what that means. But then the next line throws us that little complication. To secure the blessings of liberty. Is wearing a mask or getting a shot a violation of someone's liberty? And oh, by the way, which comes first in the list? the general welfare of all the people or an individual's liberty? See, even the preamble is open to discussion and debate. A lot of people want to say the Constitution is a fixed thing and it has to be done this way and it has to be done. No, no, no. Even the very preamble, it's not perfect. We're going to find a way to change it. We're going to debate these issues of what's liberty versus general welfare and to secure the blessings of liberty to our posterity. In other words, you. What are we passing on to you? Matters. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It's a beautiful preamble. It's well thought out, but also too, it causes us to think and to debate. Now, you've done your 33 study stack thing, so you should know that there are how many articles in the original draft of the Constitution before it was amended? Very good. Did I hear it? Say it out loud. How many? 7, right? Let's go through them. Article 1. Now, by the way, the structure of this is really simple to follow. They really did a good job of structuring this document really nicely. So Article 1 is about what? Who has the power in this country if they have the votes? Who's the first article? Not second, not third, number 1. What's Article 1 about? Which branch? Ooh, very good. Legislative branch. Congress. It's about how Congress is organized and how Congress can pass laws, and it gives the powers of Congress in Article 1, Section 8. It's the longest of the 3 first ones, longest of all of them, because this is where they considered the power should reside. Okay, so what's the second article about? That's right. It's the executive. What's the job of the executive? To do what the legislature tells them to do. Can President Biden expand Bears Ears down in southern Utah and make it a bigger national monument and restore that other and make one of his own just because he wants to? What gives him the authority to reestablish Bears Ears, to overturn the previous presidential order? Yes, what's the name of the act? Either, go ahead. Antiquities Act of 1906, close enough. That's close enough. That law said presidents can set aside things of basically historic interest, like if there's a Native American burial ground, they can make it a monument, they can protect it. And so Biden did that. He was within the law. He couldn't just go and say, hey, I want to take this county in Arizona and make it a national monument. No, he can't do that. He has to follow that law, and he did. He can only execute the will of Congress, and that's it. And the way he gets things done is through presidential order sometimes. So for example, he's commander-in-chief of the military. Can he issue orders to the military? Those are presidential orders. It makes a lot more sense when you think of it in terms of the military, right? But they're within the jurisdiction or the power that he has under the Constitution. Now let's go Article 3. What's Article 3 about? Yes.
Judicial.
Very good. Isn't this simple? It's the judicial system. So yeah. So we need to go into more detail here later. This is the shortest of the first 3. By the way, we spend more time talking about how to pick a president than almost anything else. It's the most amended part of the Constitution. We have never actually figured out how we should pick a president quite yet. Should it be by popular vote? Or should we allow rural states to have a bigger say? Because otherwise they might get left out of the system through the Electoral College. The way we decided in the Constitution to elect a president has actually never worked well. And sometimes it's broken down completely. But that's a discussion for another day. Let's talk about this one though. This is the shortest thing you can imagine. Why? They ran out of time. So they started out very simply. They simply said, we're going to have a Supreme Court and other courts to be named later. So let's go back here, Article 3. Another courts to be named later. That was it. A Supreme Court. Oh, by the way, Supreme Court will hear cases like from foreign countries or stuff, or if two states are fighting each other. So they outline some basic jurisdictional lines. Now, I need you to understand that term, jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the right to hear a case or not. For example, who gets to hear the case about your speeding through Mapleton? The city court that was set up by the city council to hear those cases. Would it go to a state court? Would it go to the Supreme Court of the United States? Obviously not. So they have jurisdiction. Now, could the Supreme Court listen to your case about speeding?
Well, if they chose to decide it's broken up, the laws.
What if it was proven that the police in Mapleton were simply being told to stop as many people under the age of 25 as possible, which is what they do, by the way. And they were literally discriminated against a certain group of people over and over and over again. It was costing lots and lots and lots of money. Could a case like that be tried in federal court based on discrimination laws from the national level? Oh, yeah. But it's not the speeding ticket. It's the unequal treatment under the local law, that the local law was discriminated against a particular group. That becomes a civil rights violation, and civil rights are covered under Amendment 14 of the US Constitution. So there's a possibility if the local government abuses somebody's rights, that it could end up in the lap of a federal court. That's kind of important to know, especially when we have a movement going on called Black Lives Matter. Really important if you know the root of that. If you don't, just kind of look it up a little bit and get familiar with that term, because it's an important movement in American history. But here's what happened next. When the first Congress comes together, now remember, the Constitution itself was written in 1787. But here's the thing, first Congress didn't meet till 2 years later. It took them 2 years to approve the Constitution in the states. And boy, was that a battle, because the states are saying, wait a minute, we sent you to represent the states, but you said we the people, and you're doing all these things, and you're taking power away from the states. So there was a big debate on that. The Constitution almost didn't get approved, by the way, but it did. It got ratified eventually. But here's the thing. The first Congress comes in, and one of the very first thing they did under a guy by the name of Ellsworth, and with the help of James Madison and others, they passed a law called the Judiciary Act of 1789. And the year is important. This is the very first year of our country. Our country became a country in 1789. That is actually the correct answer on the test. Not when the Constitution was written. It hadn't been approved yet. It went into effect in 1789. That's the beginning of the United States of America. It wasn't 1776 or 1775 or 1789. It was 1798. And they passed this, and they fleshed out this very weak portion of the Constitution. They basically, it said, okay, you're going to have one Supreme Court, and you're going to have other courts to be named later. Well, this is the naming the other courts later part, and outlining the jurisdiction of the levels. Now, here's what they came up with in the Judiciary Act of 1789. Yes, okay, the Constitution says we're going to have one Supreme Court, so we're going to have that. And we're going to have 3 justices on that court. Wait a minute, wait, time out. You mean it doesn't say how many justices are on the Supreme Court in the Constitution? No. How many are there today? 9. How do we get to 9? A lot of people think that's in the Constitution. We're supposed to have 9. No. They started out with 3. Now, they also had courts of appeal, right? So they said, look, the Supreme Court can't hear all the cases, even at that time in history. So we're going to, each one of these first 3 judges will go on a tour of one region of the country. So one took New England, another one took the middle states, another one took the southern states. And every year they travel on a circuit through those states to hear all the appeals cases in the Circuit Court of Appeals. Everybody got that? So our appeals courts are also called the appeals courts or the circuit courts. So you have 3 circuit courts, 3 justices, and they actually did a double job. They were not just Supreme Court justices, they also went around the circuits, and they would hear these cases, and they bring them back to their colleagues and decide. By the way, they weren't even given office space to begin with. They were stuck in some dingy rooms back in the Federal Hall in New York City in the early days. It was really quite something. This was never meant to be a co-equal branch of government. The power structure was to be Congress first, president to do the will of Congress, and oh, by the way, just to hear the cases. They were not to have had great power in the Constitution itself. They just didn't foresee it happening. It would happen later. Then they set up 13 district courts because there were 13 states at the time. So every state had a district judge that was appointed by the president, and then guess what? Was approved by the Senate, and they heard cases. And so when the circuit court guys came around, they could review those cases and take them up, and it worked beautifully. The truth of the matter is, though, later they decided to go to 6 Supreme Court justices. And for those of you on your phones, you're making a big mistake right now. You need to pay attention. I'm going to wait for you. You need to put your phones away because obviously this is impeding in your learning. So put them away completely in your bags. Okay, so they went to 6 justices. Now, who decides that it's going to go from 3 to 6? In fact, who decided 3 in the first place? Congress in the what act? And that was amended one day to say, let's have 6 judges. Now, tell what's wrong with 6? What's wrong with 6? What would be wrong with 4 or 2 or 8? Yeah.
You can have a tie.
And if you have a tie, there's no decision, right? So they quickly learned we better go to 7 and then to 9. They went to 9. 9 is where it's been forever. And people just think that it's always got to be 9. Who could change it and make it? By the way, some of these people are really old and they can't hear a lot of cases. What if we had a few more younger judges that could actually hear these cases a little bit more and do all the prep work involved? There's a lot of writing to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. You just don't show up one day and write a decision. What if we went to 15? What would be wrong with that?
Who appoints them?
Oh. So what if we just made the court magically 15? Who would get to appoint the remaining judges after 9? Biden would. Oh. So it might be that we're just stuck with 9 politically, even though the court would be healthier. But what if they did this? What if they said, we're going to go to 15, but Biden can only pick 1 new judge. The next president, 1 more new judge. The next president, 1 more new judge until we get to 15.
Issue with that is you do it for periods of
4 years, you have to be the numbers.
Would it affect our election process?
yes.
Of course it would. There'd be a battle every election over it. But by the same token, shouldn't we really have more justices than that? Shouldn't it actually be maybe more like 21? Because there are a lot of cases. We're a big country now. And we're still stuck with 9, which is what we had over 100 years ago.
Well, where are we?
It's an interesting question. It really is. And it's one that we should debate one day. Go ahead, comment real quick.
If we did 1 judge every presidency, then you would have even numbers every other
Oh
presidency.
yeah, that's a good point. So we'd have to do 2 and then 2 and then 2.
And then it would also not.
Yeah, good point. Well done, by the way. Take an EQSA off because that's thinking beyond what we were talking about. Good job. All right, so now here's how it turns out today. The original intent, of course, you have 1 district court per state, but then some states get really big like California, New York, and so on. So now we're up to 94 district courts. It's exactly the same system as defined in this 3-tiered federal court system that was outlined in the Judiciary Act of 1789. Look, this is where your rights are protected, is in jury trials and the grand jury. We'll talk more about that. We'll talk about your regular juries. At the district court level, there's 94 of them. By the way, look at this diagram over here. See the Department of Justice, and you guys who are at home can't see this, but there's a Justice Department there. They also have 94 attorneys general, 1 for each of these district courts that are appointed by the president to try cases in this court system. Okay, so the Justice Department, the executive branch, has basically attorneys general that oversee cases at each of these. So you got US district courts, 94 of them. Bankruptcy is another issue we'll talk about another day, but that's 94. So it went from 13 to 94 as we added states and population. Then they decided that the circuit court system wasn't working. The judges themselves need to stay in DC. So they now pick these regional courts. And oh, by the way, on this level, you get 1 judge on the district level. And here you get up to 3 that get to hear appeals cases. I'm going to play for you a doozy of an appeals case out of Texas next week, where it's 1 decision was made at the district level, the appeals court changed that maybe, and these guys interfere, or not interfere, but hear the appeals, And then those are filtered, and the Supreme Court, right? There's no jury trial up there. There's no jury trial here in the appeals court either. You only get a jury trial down here. So that's your Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments that play. But when you get to here, it's a very different ballgame. And the Supreme Court only hears the cases it wants to hear, which are really not very many. It takes 3 justices to decide, whether or not they only want to hear a case, and they only hear the ones they want. If you say, oh, I lost my case at the district court, I'm taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. Can you do that? No. First of all, you got to go to the appeals system, and they're probably going to reject it anyway, because most appeals are rejected. And then also, too, it's only a few that are going to go up that filter that the Supreme Court says, we need to hear this case. And so that's kind of how it's tiered today based on the Judiciary Act of 1789. And now here's your appeals courts. You have these 12 here. There's actually a 13th, which is in DC, that does some special things, but we'll talk about that separately. But basically, Utah, if you go to district court in Utah, which is housed in Salt Lake, they have branch offices, but basically here, Salt Lake. And if you appeal, you go to Colorado, to the appeals court in Colorado. And I had a parent once that was a member of that court. And I think at the time there were 10 justices there, but they break into groups of 3 to make decisions. Sometimes they'll all come together and work on a case. It's their discretion. I imagine it's more now. I don't imagine it's just 10 in the 10th Circuit, but Utah's appeals go to Colorado. Decisions made in Utah only affect Utah. Decisions made in this purple area, which is the 10th Circuit, only affect this. Decisions made here do not affect California, Texas, or Florida. Only Utah and those other states like Oklahoma and whatever. Well, let me give you a quick example. Utah and Oklahoma. A federal district court judge said that the state of Utah's ban against LGBTQ marriage was unconstitutional. It went to appeal to Colorado along with an Oklahoma case. And this panel said, yeah, that's right. And so for a brief period of time, this section of the country had LGBTQ gay marriage before almost anybody else. That was an interesting case. Then the Supreme Court says, wait a minute, this is just so many cases. So they took a case out of New York and heard it, the Windsor case, and came up with their important ruling, which is now the law of the land. But this system needs to be understood by y'all. Okay, so number 3 is the judicial system. Okay, so what's the Article 4 about now? What do you think? Go for it. In a backdoor way. That's right. The power that states don't have. It basically says federalism is going to be a thing. We're going to do federalism, but we're also going to limit the power of the states. We're going to take the states from thinking of themselves as countries, and they're now going to think of themselves more as provinces of a bigger country. Okay, so really we only have one state. That's the United States of America. State in that time period meant country. Like France was a state, England was a state. Now the United States is a state, but we have all these 50 states, and that term is an anachronism. Basically, it doesn't really fit. States or provinces with certain power. They're regional powers. By the way, Russia is a federalist state too. They do the same thing. They break out power by regions. Lots of countries do. It makes good sense. Canada is. Canada's provinces, it's federalism there too. They have a central government, but then they have power to the provinces. So this is the states, and this outlines federalism and says the states do have control and power over certain things. By the way, most of the laws you will fall afoul of and go to court will be either local or state laws, not national ones. It's very rare that somebody in Utah would have to go to federal court. Article 5, very important one. What is it? By the way, we're leading up to something here. So you don't know? Okay, you did the study stack, right? It was in there, right? That was in there. Amendments. How do you change the Constitution? And there's 2 ways, right? We've only ever used one of them. And how many times have we changed or amended the Constitution? Yeah.
26 or 27.
27, good. Do you need to know that number? And will you eventually, before this class is over, have to know what each of those amendments is about? And all of these came after the original 7 articles by 2 years because they were written by the first Congress of the United States. The same group that wrote the Judiciary Act of 1789 also wrote the Bill of Rights. Jacqueline Grace, you are on your way, okay? It's Mr. Oh, you're being checked out, okay? All right, so amendments. Now let's get to the next one, which is also extremely important for today's lecture. And that is what? Oh, it's called the Supremacy Clause. You ready for this? Winding all this down. If the states approve this Constitution that we wrote on behalf of the people, not the states, this becomes the supreme law of the land, superseding the powers of the state. Whoa. So if the state signed on to this Constitution, they were literally giving up power. It's called the Supremacy Clause. That this Constitution and the laws passed by its Congress, like the Judiciary Act and the Antiquities Act, would become the supreme law of the land. Can the governor of Utah veto Biden's actions in Bears Ears? No, because it's federal land to begin with. It's not Utah land. Half of Utah is owned by the federal government, and this Antiquities Act covers that. So Supremacy Clause, supreme law of the land. And then the last one is how it gets approved. How do we get the states to approve this? And boy, that's a rocky story that I can't wait to tell you one day. All right, so let's now just pause this for a second and go to an example, okay, of the Supremacy Clause. Now let's see if I've got the right clip here for you. Okay, here it is. So here we have a governor of Texas, Republican governor of Texas, who's passing all these gubernatorial orders, an executive order. He's the executive of the state of Texas. Mr. Cox is the executive of the state of Utah. He can only do what the state legislature gives him the authority to do. But this guy did something pretty remarkable yesterday. Let's go ahead and play this really fast.
Governor Greg Abbott banning any entity, including private businesses, from acquiring vaccines, a direct challenge to President Biden's federal mandates. The confusion, which order will Texas companies follow?
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. As the nation turns the corner in the fight against COVID, the thing that some experts believe has helped slow the spread, vaccine mandates, are facing the biggest challenge yet. The governor of Texas tonight banning businesses and entities in his state from requiring proof of vaccination, setting the state on a collision course with the feds and leaving some companies that operate there caught in the middle.
So as of right now in the state of Texas, you can't require anybody that works there to show proof of vaccination. Now I know Google, my former company, has a lot of employees in Texas. And they want all their employees vaccinated. But in Texas, do they have to? Think carefully on this one. Oh, by the way, here's another announcement. You ready for this? The Biden administration controls our borders, right? They are now allowing anybody who wants to cross the Canadian border to come, vacation and whatever, visit family, or somebody from Mexico come across, visit family, whatever, work, whatever happens to be. Anybody who wants to cross that border has to show proof of vaccination. But if they do, we've opened up the borders. We just opened up the Canadian border and we just opened up the Mexican border to people who can show us that they have been vaccinated. Wait a minute, isn't there kind of a long border between Texas and Mexico? So does this law apply to the fact that people coming into Texas, you don't have to show proof of vaccination? What if you're an American citizen who basically jumps back and forth across that border all the time for business or whatever other reason? Do you have to be vaccinated in Texas, but in California you do? This is what we call cross-jurisdictional problems. Biden says, I have jurisdiction over this. The governor says, no, you don't. Any Google employee that doesn't want to get vaccinated according to its company policy and to your, basically, if you have 100 employees or more, have to get vaccinated or show a negative test every week. Doesn't have to do it in the state of Texas. Let's keep playing.
Nationally, the number of fully vaccinated has inched up to 56.5%, leaving 67 million Americans who are eligible for the shots unvaccinated, even as attention turns again to booster shots for the already vaccinated. Miguel Almaguer tells us more.
Even as some hospitals in hard-hit Texas face another surge of COVID cases, the governor here is issuing an executive order prohibiting any entity, including private businesses, from imposing vaccine requirements. Fighting what he calls federal overreach, Governor Greg Abbott says COVID vaccines are safe, effective, and our best defense against the virus, but should remain voluntary and never forced.
We continuously are releasing mandates.
What do you think of his thoughts on that?
So it's a well-phrased challenge. What do I expect?
Not me neither. And where's it going to end up?
Supreme Court.
Federal court and maybe district court first, then what court second, and then maybe to even the Supreme Court. This is a good, interesting challenge. However, who's going to win it? Why? Because he's got federal law behind his OSHA rules, and they're not even due out till 2 weeks, by the way. So this wouldn't apply for another couple of weeks. But also right now you have these big businesses saying, timeout, who should we obey? Do these businesses like Google, do they want to have a fight with every one of their employees entering the door? So it's putting them in the spot where they're the ones that have to decide, wait a minute, our policy as a company says we need to be vaccinated, but you said I don't have to show you proof, and you're just going to barge in and go to work anyway. And does this also apply to masks? So this puts people in a real bind right now. And let's take a look. Let's just listen a little bit more.
That are undermining everything that public health stands for.
With many frontline workers outraged by the ban on vaccine mandates, Abbott, who contracted COVID in August, has tried to stop school districts from requiring masks and COVID vaccines, though they have long required vaccinations for diseases like polio and measles. Some of the nation's biggest corporations are based in Texas. American Airlines saying today, we believe the federal vaccine mandate supersedes any conflicting state laws.
They're just
Is that a good position for that airline to take?
Yeah. because
Do they fly
operate
from
in
state to
several other
state?
states.
That's exactly right. And by the same token, right, Google, no, you're going to have to be vaccinated to work for them, or have an exemption, like we talked about. But in the end, who's going to win this case? And because of what clause in the Constitution? Yeah. The Supremacy Clause. And it'll be, his order will be blocked in federal court. He doesn't have jurisdiction in this case. He's assuming an authority that he doesn't have. Why? Yeah. Making a political statement? Maybe he's running for what? Running for president. Like the other guy in Florida. What's his name? Remember, you only need a third of the Republican Party in a three-way contest to get the nomination. And then anything can happen in a general election, as we've learned in recent years. So maybe this is more of a political posturing. I don't know. Or maybe he truly believes it. But in the end, it's likely that he loses. But that was an interesting case that he made, right? Yeah. It's the idea in the concept. Do you have the liberty to decide for yourself, or you have to be told what to do? And I think it's an interesting case, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Yeah.
So because there's a law on the federal level already, that because of the sixth.
Yeah.
But I think his best argument is to say that it's not the federal government.
It's an interesting argument, right? Doesn't it play into this? Let's go view this real fast before the bell rings. You're thinking 10th Amendment. You're thinking 10th Amendment. We'll get into that later, by the way. So I appreciate you bringing it up. But doesn't it fall into that? Promote the general welfare versus pursuing blessings of liberty. Isn't this argument even tied up in the preamble? So it's an interesting case. And Texas gives us a lot to think about as we kind of conclude this little lecture. All right. Now, who's right? whoever wins the case in court. That's what happens there. So whoever wins the case will have that. Now set a precedent for future. All right, well, so much for that, guys. Let's end this lecture. I'm sorry that we didn't have more time to take